Do you like ninjas? Do you hate Yuriko? Because you're a hipster? Or because she's a blatant cheater? Krydle of Baldur's Gate may be a rogue, but he enables all of your favorite ninja strategies, all while respecting the commander tax. No offense to anyone who likes Yuriko. Play how you want. Welcome to the Commander's Beacon. I am Eric, and this channel is dedicated to unconventional commander decks and strategies. Kamigawa Neon Dynasty has been out for a few weeks now, and people have been excited about vehicles and shrines and frogs. But don't forget that Neon Dynasty has expanded another loved archetype, ninjas. Now, you may have thought the ninja tribal had already been solved by Yuriko, Tiger's Shadow, and there's good reason to think this. Yuriko draws you cards, she drains your opponents, she rewards you for playing ninjas with even more card draw and even more draining your opponents, and of course you'll never pay commander tax for her. But if you want to return to the realm of fair magic, no offense to Yuriko players, and to be honest, while I do think the fact that Yuriko dodges commander tax is bad card design, I do actually think the rest of the card is reasonable, and Yuriko can be fun to play against most of the time. But if you're a hipster like me, you won't touch Yuriko with a proverbial 10-foot pole. So let's talk about Krydle of Baldur's Gate. Now, Krydle costs just blue-black for a 1/3 human elf rogue. Whenever Krydle deals combat damage to a player, that player loses 1 life and mills a card, and you gain 1 life and scry 1. And whenever you attack, you may pay 2. If you do, target creature can't be blocked this turn. In this deck, and I think in pretty much every Krydle deck, we're going to ignore Krydle's first line of text and focus heavily on that second line. And even if you're not a hipster, there are some good reasons to consider Krydle to lead your ninjas deck. Because ninjas love to deal combat damage to players. Most of them have some combat damage trigger, but they're not typically very evasive on their own. Fortunately, their ninjutsu ability, which lets you return an unblocked attacker to your hand and lets you put a ninja from your hand into play tapped and attacking, well, this is a good way to make those ninjas evasive, but they will need some help getting there. So you need an unblocked attacker to get your ninjas to deal combat damage easily. Now, Yuriko decks do this by playing little 1/1 evasive dorks like Slitherblade. Attack with your 1 mana unblockable creature, then use ninjutsu to put a ninja from your hand into play, tapped and attacking, and of course unblocked. Then you can recast your 1 mana Slitherblade or whatever after combat to use again on your next turn. In fact, the average Yuriko deck on EDHREC has 12 such creatures that cost 2 mana or less and have some form of evasion. But there is a problem here. Let's say I attack with my Slitherblade, and of course it doesn't get blocked, so I ninjutsu in my Ninja of the Deep Hours. Ninja of the Deep Hours is now attacking and unblocked, so I'll get to draw a card. Great. But on my next turn, I untap with Ninja of the Deep Hours already on the battlefield. It's a 2/2 with no evasion. Good luck ever hitting someone with this guy again, unless you can bounce it back to your hand to ninjutsu it into play again, or give it evasion by some other means. And there are plenty of ways to do this, of course, but do you really have space for ninjas, Slitherblades, and evasion in your Yuriko deck? Well, don't forget the Yuriko is often also playing some top deck manipulation to increase the draining effect of her combat damage trigger. There's not much room to add more evasion to the deck. In fact, that average Yuriko deck runs only 3 pieces of evasion to help your ninjas deal combat damage after they're already on the battlefield. And that's where Krydle comes in. For a 2 mana fee, Krydle can make any one of your ninjas unblockable every single turn. You can use Krydle to enable ninjutsu, or just to give evasion to a ninja that's already on the battlefield. With Krydle, we don't need to play Slitherblade and the like just to get our ninjas into play, which frees up space in our deck for other things, like more ninjas. With Krydle in the command zone instead of Yuriko, not only will you get mucho hipster points, but your deck will be simpler to operate. That means your game plan will be more resilient. So let's talk about why you might want to build Ninja Tribal with Krydle of Baldur's Gate. Let's start with the ninjas. We have 20 ninjas in this deck, and some of them have absolutely brutal combat damage triggers. Silent Blade Oni takes your opponent's spells right out of their hands and casts them for free. Fallen Shinobi, the infamous zombie ninja, does the same but for the top 2 cards of the opponent's library. And the new Nashi Moon Sage Scion lets you play the best card from among the top card of each player's library when it deals combat damage, and you get to pay life instead of mana to cast it. Inkai's Servant of Oni steals creatures from your opponent's graveyards. Sakashima's Student may not steal an opponent's creature, but it doesn't come into play as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, possibly an opponent's creature if you want. Of course, it also has ninjutsu, so it can come into play as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, but it's also tapped and attacking and unblocked, which is very nice. And of course, Yuriko might not be commanding this deck, but she's definitely in the 99. But there are more utility-oriented ninjas lower on the mana curve as well. Moonblade Shinobi and Mist Syndicate Naga make tokens for you, probably jump blockers, since ninjas don't really block. Along with Yuriko, there's Ninja of the Deep Powers and Ingenious Infiltrator, which can draw you cards. Mistblade Shinobi and Moonsnare Specialist can bounce creatures, well, Throat Slitter could just outright kill them. Among other ninjas. There are plenty of useful ninjas available in Dimir colors. I mean, Dimir is the primary color combination for ninjas. You probably already knew that. Now, Krydle can help get combat damage triggers from these ninjas turn after turn, but we do have some effects to help out. You know, in case Krydle gets killed, since we pay commander tax in this deck. Let's talk about some of those effects. Now, Yuriko decks rely on Yuriko's combat damage trigger to drain opponents out of the game. But in this deck, most of our damage just comes from good, old-fashioned punching our opponents in the face with our ninja army. So we'll use some effects that make them punch harder, or more directly. First, I want to mention the new Mindlink Mech. This vehicle costs 2 and a blue, it's a 4/3 with flying, and it crews for 1. Now, whenever Mindlink Mech becomes crewed for the first time each turn, until end of turn, it becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature that crewed at this turn, except it's a 4/3, it's a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types, and it has flying. So by crewing Mindlink Mech with one of your ninjas, it will become a copy of that ninja, but again it will be a 4/3 and it will have flying. This will give that ninja some evasion and probably a power boost most of the time. A Mindlink Mech is great in a deck like this one, where you want to get these combat damage triggers, but the creatures that have them aren't evasive on their own. We'll also use a package of equipment to make our ninjas more evasive or more damaging, or both. A Smoke Shroud is an obvious ninja deck inclusion. This 2-mana aura gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 in flying, and when a ninja enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Smoke Shroud from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to that creature. Now, since you'll often use ninjutsu to bring your ninjas into play, you'll pretty much be able to recur Smoke Shroud from your graveyard to use it again and again. It's kind of like Rancor if you're playing a ninja deck. Whisper Silk Cloak and Winged Boots both grant evasion and protection. It's unblockability and Shroud in the case of Whisper Silk Cloak, and Winged Boots gives flying and ward 4. Thieves' Tools and Trailblazers' Boots grant unblockability, as long as the equipped creature has power 3 or less in the case of Thieves' Tools, and all but maybe 3 or 4 of the ninjas in this deck have power 3 or less. And in the case of Trailblazers' Boots, the equipped creature will be unblockable as long as the defending player has a non-basic land. Have you ever played against someone with only basics? Yeah, me either. Mask of Riddles gives you some evasion in the form of Fear, that is, the equipped creature can't be blocked except by black or artifact creatures, and when the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. And speaking of evasion, don't forget Rogue's Passage and Access Tunnel. These lands let you spend some mana to make a creature unblockable. Rogue's Passage costs 4 mana, or effectively 5 because you have to tap itself as well, to make any target creature unblockable until end of turn. Access Tunnel does the same, but for 3 mana and tapping it, and it can only target a creature with power 3 or less. Again, that's most of our creatures. Let's also not forget Higure the Still Wind. This legendary ninja lets you pay 2 to make any target ninja unblockable until end of turn. Oh, and it tutors ninjas out of your deck when it hits a player, so that's great. Now, in almost any tribal deck, I like Heirloom Blade. This equipment costs 3 to cast, but equips for only 1, and it gives the equipped creature +3/+1, so it's a pretty good power boost for the mana. And when the equipped creature dies, you get to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature, the card that shares a type with it, and then you can put that card into your hand. So Heirloom Blade will replace our dead ninja with another ninja, which is decent insurance against both board wipes and targeted removal. But our strongest 3 equipment are Quiet as Spike, Vorpal Sword, and Fire Shrieker. Quiet as Spike, of course, halves the defending player's life total when the equipped creature deals combat damage, which is great if you have evasive creatures. Vorpal Sword will set you back a bunch of mana, but it just makes the player lose the game when you hit them. Hint, don't cast this until you're ready to use it because your opponents will notice and possibly smite you. Now, all but 4 of our ninjas have combat damage triggers that we want to replicate. Fire Shrieker grants the equipped creature double strike, so that will double all of those combat damage triggers. And the cool thing here in this ninja deck is that we're using effects like Krydle or a Whisper Silk Cloak or whatnot to get our ninjas in for combat damage a lot of the time. We might use ninjutsu to deploy a ninja initially, but we're not continually bouncing them to our hand and then using ninjutsu to redeploy them again and again to get them through for combat damage. And what that means is that we can use all of these equipment like Fire Shrieker and everything else we've talked about here to equip our ninjas for additional value. Because if we were relying mostly on ninjutsu to get our ninjas in for damage, we'd never be able to equip them, because you can only ninjutsu a creature into play during the combat step, and you can only equip at sorcery speed. So applying something like Fire Shrieker to double our ninja's combat damage triggers, or again, anything that we get from these equipment, it's something that most ninja decks don't get to take advantage of, but we can put it to great use here. So those are some of the redundancies that let us grant evasion outside of Krydle's ability, as well as making our ninjas hit harder. Now let's talk about some of the other support cards that help this deck function. Okay, so when I first started building this deck, I wanted Grazilax's Illithid Scholar as the commander. Now, Grazilax could be a really good commander for ninjas. It's a 3/2 that costs 1 blue, and Grazilax has whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand. And whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So Grazilax is awesome with ninjas because it basically lets you get a ninjutsu trigger from any of your creatures of your choice that you've got on the battlefield, as long as you're attacking with at least one creature that's not blocked, any creature. Let's say, for example, you've got a Thousand-Faced Shadow, a 1/1 ninja with flying, and a Silent Blade Oni, both on the battlefield and ready to attack. Now, maybe your opponent doesn't have flying blockers, but they can and they will block Silent Blade Oni because nobody wants to get smacked by that jerk. But with Grazilax, they will anyways. If you attack with both your Thousand-Faced Shadow and your Silent Blade only the Silent Blade Oni gets blocked. Grazilax says, oh, this creature is blocked. Do you want to return it to your hand? Of course you do, so you return it to your hand. And, because Thousand-Faced Shadow is still unblocked, Silent Blade Oni is back in your hand, and you can use Silent Blade Oni's ninjutsu ability to bounce Thousand-Faced Shadow back to your hand and put the Silent Blade into play, tapped, attacking, and unblocked. So Grazilax is great here, and don't forget that it draws you cards as well. And that's why I had tried building a mono-blue ninja deck with Grazilax. There just weren't enough impactful ninjas in mono-blue alone, and the deck didn't feel too effective to me. Nonetheless, Grazilax is still awesome in the 99 of this deck. There's also Cunning Evasion, which is basically the first half of Grazilax in enchantment form. Cunning Evasion costs 1 and a blue, and it says whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand. So again, just like Grazilax, this really helps you enable your ninjutsu abilities on any creature you want, even if it's already on the battlefield, again as long as you can manage to get at least one unblocked attacker. We'll use Crystal Shard as well. For just a single blue mana, or 3 colorless mana, we can tap this artifact to return a target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. So we can get our ninjas back into our hand to ninjutsu again, we can save one of our creatures from targeted removal or board wipes, or we can bounce an opponent's creature if they tap out and can't pay the 1. Now, even though this is a ninja deck, we still need to talk about Zareth-san the Trickster. Zareth-san is a 4/4 Merfolk rogue that costs 3 blue-black. It has Flash and Rogue Jutsu, basically. For 2 and a black, you can return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand, like Krydle for example, to put Zareth-san into play from your hand tapped and attacking. And when Zareth-san deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Any permanent. This can be ramp. It can be Kozilek, whatever. Now again, because Krydle is a rogue and he can make himself unblockable, you're guaranteed to be able to get Zareth-san into play for 6 mana. You know, the 2 to make Krydle unblockable, plus the 4 to rogue jutsu Zareth-san into play. And once Zareth-san is on the battlefield, your opponents still have to deal with it because Krydle can just make Zareth-san unblockable every single turn and just let you keep stealing stuff from your opponent's graveyards. So Zareth-san isn't technically a ninja, but it's such an awesome card for Krydle that it's in the deck. Now I also want to mention Rogue Class. This is an enchantment that costs blue-black, and at sorcery speed you can level it up. So all by itself, with no other investment, Rogue Class is level 1, it says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library face down. You may look at it for as long as it remains exiled. But that's all it does. You can look at the exiled card, but you can't do anything with it. Not too useful. Now if you pay 1 blue-black, you can advance Rogue Class to level 2, then all of your creatures have menace, so it's a nice little bit of evasion. And the Rogue Class still retains its level 1 ability as well. And then if you pay 2 blue-black, you can level it up to 3, and at level 3, Rogue Class lets you play cards exiled with Rogue Class. That level 1 ability. And you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. We talked about Zareth-san stealing things. We talked about ninjas that steal things from our opponents. Rogue Class helps us steal even more things, and ninjas are great at dealing combat damage and enabling Rogue Class's abilities. So we don't have a ton of theft effects in this deck, but we do have some, and those are going to really help us against decks that try to go over the top of us because our ninjas are just not that big, but these theft effects will help us out. So those are some of the synergistic cards in this deck that help the Ninja Tribe. You can check out the link to the full deck list in the description. I haven't mentioned too many of our ramp or removal cards, for example, but they're pretty standard Dimir staples. Again, check out that link to the full deck list in the description to see all the details. For now, let's go over the deck stats and cost. This Krydle Ninja deck has an average mana value of 2.89. There are 20 ninjas in the deck. That might seem a bit low, but then again, there are only 35 Commander legal Dimir Ninjas in all of Magic, and some of them are not that great. I really wanted to focus on ninjas with combat damage triggers, so that you're really rewarded when you connect with them. Not counting Krydle, we have 11 cards that give our ninjas some form of evasion, so we should be able to reliably get in with those ninjas for combat damage. We have 10 pieces of ramp, and 9 pieces of card advantage. There's also a few theft effects that provide a form of card advantage. I feel like it's an advantage to take my opponent's cards anyways. Now I'm not counting those theft effects as card advantage for this purpose, but sometimes you'll be able to use them that way. This deck has 13 pieces of single target removal, and 3 board wipes. And at the time of this recording, this deck has a value of $298.50 on TCGplayer.com. Unfortunately, I can't really recommend a budget version of a ninjas deck, because some of the most powerful ninjas are from old Kamigawa sets and are pretty expensive. Sakashima Student is $80, Higure the Still Wind, which can make your ninjas unblockable for just 2 mana, is around $25. Ink Eyes is awesome graveyard theft, but it's $30. Even Yuriko is nearly $20. And there are a handful of other ninjas with price tags between $5 and $15. And removing these key ninjas from your deck would leave the deck much weaker, as you'd only have access to some pretty terrible replacement ninjas that don't even have combat damage triggers. So that's Ninja Tribal with Krydle of Baldur's Gate. Again, if you like the evasive ninja theme, but maybe you don't want to play Yuriko for whatever reason, Krydle is a great replacement. Now, I can't say that Krydle is as strong as Yuriko. Generally it's not. Yuriko can pressure everyone's life total while drawing you cards, which is really powerful. But again, with Krydle, your game plan requires fewer pieces to operate, so your deck will be more consistent. Like Silent Blade Oni and Nashi Moon Sage's Scion, These guys can just steal things from your opponents, and because we have lots of tools in this deck to make our creatures unblockable, our opponents will need to use some sort of removal to deal with our ninjas directly, or we'll just generate advantage from them turn after turn. And again, that's the biggest advantage that I think this deck has over Yuriko, is that with Krydle and our other evasion effects, we can just get our ninjas in for combat damage every turn. We're not relying on bouncing them back to our hand to ninjutsu them again. So our opponents can't just take that, that initial hit when we ninjutsu something into play, and then, prepare blockers for next time. They actually have to kill our ninjas to stop them, because we're going to give them evasion every turn. But that is all I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, please click that like button, or subscribe if you haven't already, or leave a comment, or better yet, check out our Discord channel where you can discuss Commander deck building, or maybe play some games. And if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon. Thanks so much to all of my patrons. Patrons get to vote on upcoming content and more. You can find the link to the Discord and the Patreon in the description. But thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.